She'd seen his type before. Or, at least, she thought she had. Worn hoodie, a bit of gray in the beard, quiet, didn't look anyone in the eye. The kind of man who probably cashed paychecks from a warehouse job, if he had a job at all. So, when he slid his ID across the counter and asked to withdraw $500 in cash, she didn't even try to hide the smirk. "From this account?" she asked, tilting the screen like it confirmed her assumption. He nodded once. Calm. Direct. She tapped a few keys, glanced at the balance, and froze, just for a moment. But the habit was too strong. The judgment too automatic. Security protocols require verification for withdrawals over $100, she said, though the policy didn't apply to account holders like him. She asked to see his ID again, then his signature, then called a supervisor just to be safe. Customers behind him sighed, shifted, whispered. He said nothing, not when they whispered, not when she stalled, not even when she said, "You can sit over there while we double-check some things." What she didn't know was that the man she was making wait in the corner owned the holding company that signs her paycheck. Now, ask yourself, if someone publicly humiliated you for simply accessing your own money, would you make a scene? Or would you wait until your silence became the loudest thing in the room? Guys, let us know in the comments. Speech balloon and tag someone who's seen quiet power in action. Elijah Ward never rushed. Every Tuesday at 8:45 a.m. sharp, he arrived at Midtown Federal Bank 15 minutes early. Not because he had to, but because he believed time is a form of respect. That belief came from his grandfather, a man who told him, when they expect you late, show up early. And let that be your loudest word. He wore clean sneakers, pressed jeans, and a charcoal zip-up. Nothing flashy. No jewelry. No brand names. Just quiet precision. His skin was deep brown, and his presence calm, the kind of presence that made impatient people nervous. To the world, he was just another black man waiting in line, and that's exactly how Elijah liked it. What they didn't see was what sat behind his stillness. An empire. Elijah was the founder and majority shareholder of Eastbridge Capital, a $6.4 billion private equity firm with holdings in fintech, logistics, energy, and, ironically, a majority stake in the very bank he stood outside of. He never told anyone. He didn't need to. Power, he believed, should be invisible until it has to be obvious. That morning, he nodded to the security guard like always, stepped into the lobby when the doors unlocked, took his place in line, hands clasped behind his back. The only open window was teller number 3. Marissa, late 20s, blonde, smart but impatient. The kind of employee who memorized scripts but forgot faces. She was sharp with her words, sharper with her tone, and when she didn't recognize someone, she defaulted to defensive. Elijah stepped forward, calm, composed. She barely looked up. Account number? No smile, no warmth. He gave it. She typed, paused, narrowed her eyes at the screen. "You're withdrawing $500? Elijah nodded. "Yes." "You sure?" He nodded again. She tilted her head, gave him a look like he'd just said something ridiculous. "Okay," she muttered. "ID." He handed it over. She stared longer than necessary. Your signature doesn't exactly match." Elijah stayed still. "It's mine." "Still needs supervisor clearance." Click, click, click. She tapped the screen like it was punishment. The line behind Elijah grew. A woman with a stroller. A man in a suit checking his watch. 2 students whispering. No one said anything, but everyone felt it. Marissa didn't offer an update. Didn't apologize for the delay. Didn't even look up again. But Elijah? He didn't move. He didn't sigh. He didn't roll his eyes or check the time. He just waited, with a kind of patience that unsettled people who didn't have it. Because Elijah had spent his entire life being told to wait. Wait to be served. Wait to be respected. Wait to be seen. He had waited through worse, and survived every time. 15 minutes passed. Finally, a manager arrived. Older. Nervous. He looked at Elijah, then the screen, then the ID. His posture shifted. His tone softened. "Sir, I apologize for the delay. You're all set." He nodded to Marissa. She hesitated, then began to count the money, slow and cold, as if the bills personally offended her. Elijah took them, folded once, slipped them into his wallet, then looked at her, not with anger, not with pride, just precision. "Thank you," and walked out. Marissa watched him go, rolled her eyes, and said under her breath, "I swear, they always get weird when they think we owe them something." Someone behind her heard it, didn't say anything, but they'd remember. What Marissa didn't see was where Elijah went next. He crossed the street, stepped into a mirrored building with no sign out front, took the elevator to the 39th floor, entered a space without reception because no one needed to check who he was. The boardroom lights were already on. 12 executives sat waiting. A folder marked Midtown Federal Equity Position Review sat in front of Elijah's seat. He sat down, didn't speak for a moment. Then, "We're pulling out. Full divestment. They no longer represent our standards of service." No argument, no vote, just quiet agreement. Because when Elijah Ward spoke, you moved. Friday morning, 9:02 a.m. Marissa opened her inbox. Subject: Branch Staff Review, all employees. Mandatory meeting. Unscheduled. She didn't think much of it. Probably another HR reshuffle, she told a coworker. Then came the knock. A man in a tailored navy suit walked through the glass doors. Regional VP. And behind him, Elijah Ward. Not in sneakers, not in a hoodie, but in a custom suit, gray wool, black tie. And when he looked at Marissa, she froze. Because she recognized him now, but it was too late. He didn't smile, didn't glare. He just nodded once. And as he walked past the counter, she used a command. She stood, not because she was told to, but because some people change the room just by entering it. And suddenly, she wasn't in charge anymore. Elijah didn't come back to Midtown Federal Bank the next week, or the week after. He didn't need to. Not yet. Because once you've been disrespected by a system you helped build, you don't rush to confront it. You let the cracks spread, quietly. Instead, Elijah spent his time in places the staff at Midtown would never imagine. Not boardrooms, not newsrooms, but city records offices, legal archives, and, most importantly, internal access dashboards. See, Elijah hadn't just invested in the parent company that owned Midtown Federal. He'd helped fund the infrastructure behind their CRM systems, the software that tracked account flags, employee performance metrics, internal audits. He didn't need permission to look inside. He'd paid for the key, and what he found there, in cold, clinical data, confirmed what his body had felt at that teller window. The disrespect wasn't a fluke. It was a feature. Every 6 months, Midtown ran an internal review, part of a DI compliance initiative, more for show than substance. Elijah accessed the last 3 cycles. The data was consistent. Black customers were 3 times more likely to have withdrawals flagged. Loan applications from zip codes with majority black populations had a 41% lower approval rate despite similar credit profiles. Staff in high-value branches routinely coded minority clients as escalated interactions, even when there was no policy breach. But the real dagger? 17 informal complaints, all ignored. 3 of them named the same employee, Marissa Gaines. No follow-up, no corrective notes, no training flags, just silence. Elijah didn't rage. He compiled. He built a timeline. He requested anonymized performance reviews, which legally he could. After all, he was a board-level investor. He reviewed email patterns. Not content, just behavior. Marissa had an unusually high rate of manual overrides, meaning she frequently chose to go around automated systems, especially when working with black clients. Even worse, supervisors approved most of them. The system wasn't broken. It was operating exactly as it was designed. He visited another branch, uptown, same bank. This time, the manager greeted him like a regular, offered coffee, called him Mr. Ward before seeing his ID. The difference? The branch manager was black. So was half the staff. He sat down, had a casual conversation, learned that turnover was high downtown, and most of the new hires came from the same recruiting pipeline. One known for its cultural fit, filters. Elijah already knew what that meant. 2 days later, he requested a stakeholder courtesy review with Midtown's HR head. Just a Zoom call. Nothing official. Just a shareholder checking in. She smiled. Performed. Of course, we take all guest experiences seriously. He asked one question. How many informal complaints does it take before a teller is reviewed? She froze, then recovered. Well, that depends on the content of the complaint. Sometimes customers are mistaken or emotional. He cut her off gently. 17. 3 named the same person. She blinked. He didn't elaborate. Just ended the call with, "Thank you for your time. I'll be submitting a position adjustment proposal by end of quarter." She smiled tightly, but she understood. That wasn't a threat. It was a decision. Elijah didn't need revenge. He needed visibility, and that meant tracking everything the system counted on people forgetting. Like the janitor at Midtown who told him, "You're the only one who ever says thank you." Or the security guard who whispered, "They treat anyone dark like they're trying to steal something." Or the young Latino intern who recognized Elijah's name, then texted a friend, "Bro, I think the guy who low-key owns us just came in wearing Target." Elijah didn't correct anyone, didn't lecture. He just let the walls speak. And they did, because buildings remember, especially the ones built on arrogance. 2 weeks later, Elijah received a confidential email from a mid-level compliance officer. It read, "Sir, this is off record, but I think you should know. The Midtown branch flagged your last withdrawal as unusual account activity despite no policy violation. The justification was entered manually. I've attached a screenshot. I've also CC'd no one. Do with this what you will. Respectfully, D." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. That email, just like the folded paper on the bench, was all he needed. Proof. Later that evening, Elijah sat at his desk. Not angry. Not anxious. Just certain. He opened a new folder. Labeled it System Notes, Midtown Phase. And at the top of the page, he wrote the first sentence. The insult was never personal. The silence was policy. Then he closed the file and began planning his next visit, not as a customer, but as a mirror. There's a difference between being ignored and being erased. Elijah had been ignored before. That was nothing new. But what happened next, what they tried to do behind his back quietly through the system, that was erasure. And that was the line. It began with a letter. Plain white envelope. No signature. Inside, a cold, clinical notice. Suspicious withdrawal activity, account under review. No context. No conversation. Just a threat dressed in bureaucracy. Elijah stared at it for a moment, then folded it neatly and placed it beside his coffee. He didn't get angry, because anger gives people power. And Elijah had something stronger, memory. He remembered the first time someone tried to flag his financial behavior. He was 22, just graduated, tried to open his first business account. The manager looked at his resume, then at his skin, said, "Maybe start with a savings account, son." He remembered every rejection since then, loans denied, questions escalated, cards frozen by accident. He remembered names, the tones, the systems, but most of all, he remembered who survived every one of them. This time, he wouldn't wait for their story to finish writing him out. He would write his own line. That morning, Elijah didn't go to the office. He went to the Midtown branch, the same one where the Smirk started. Same marble floors. Same quiet tension. He didn't stop at the teller. He walked straight to the branch manager's office. Knocked once. Opened the door without waiting. The manager looked up, startled. "Elijah Ward," he said too quickly. "Is there—" Elijah held up the letter. "This came to my house." The manager took it. Read it. Paled slightly. This shouldn't have gone directly to you. It's an internal procedure." "No." Elijah cut in, voice steady. "It's an internal mistake." The manager stammered. "Let me check with compliance." "I already did," Elijah said. A pause. "You checked." I checked the system. The withdrawal was flagged manually, not by automation. That override was entered under teller ID 3. Silence. That was Marissa. Elijah continued. No one reached out to verify anything. No call. No email. Just a flag. And now my account has a shadow on it. The manager stood up, flustered. Mr. Ward, I'm sure it wasn't intentional. These protocols can... Elijah raised his hand, not to threaten, to pause the noise. Then he said, You're going to want to unfile that report. The words hit like a bell dropped in water, because it wasn't just a request. It was a warning. Not shouted, not dramatic, just precise. And it carried weight no apology could lift. He left the office, didn't storm out, didn't slam a door. He just left and made one call. Not to HR, not to PR, to his legal team. Send a notice of intent to investigate for racial profiling and unlawful account flagging, he said. Also request internal audit trails for all withdrawals flagged by Teller 3 in the last 18 months. Full history. No redactions. Yes, sir. Oh, Elijah added, and send a personal copy to the press inbox at the Ledger. Use the subject line, Pattern in Progress. By evening, his inbox had 3 more messages. One from compliance, a vague apology. One from the COO, a request for a private conversation. And one from an anonymous staffer at the branch. I saw what she did. I've seen her do it before. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. He replied, only once. It's not too late. Just don't look away again. By morning, the internal audit was live. And what it found, 42 flagged transactions, 89% involved Black or Latino customers, 0 disciplinary actions, 0 complaints followed up. Marissa wasn't suspended. Not yet, but she noticed the shift. The way people stopped laughing at her jokes. The way her supervisor avoided eye contact. The way someone whispered, he's the one, the guy from that memo. She tried to cover. Said it was all protocol. Said she didn't recognize him. Said she was just being cautious. But systems don't care about intentions. They care about patterns. And Marissa's pattern had finally been spotlighted. The next time Elijah entered the bank, everything was quieter. No wait, no smirk. Marissa wasn't at her window. They said she was off rotation. He smiled, asked for $500 in cash. No questions. They handed it over like gold. He counted it slowly, then looked up. Funny thing, he said, when you treat people like threats, don't be surprised when they start bringing receipts. And then, before he walked out, he turned to the assistant manager watching nearby. Tell your people, I'm not here to make noise. I'm here to make memory. Because once someone crosses the line, they don't get to choose where the truth goes next. The elevator ride to the 26th floor was quiet, not awkward, reverent. The receptionist didn't ask for ID. She didn't dare. Instead, she pressed the button herself, then stepped aside like she was opening a door to something sacred. Because in some places, power doesn't need to raise its voice. It only needs to show up. The floor opened into Midtown Federal's executive suite. Glass everywhere. Cold. Modern. Designed to intimidate. But this time, it was the room that shrank. Elijah didn't pause at the threshold. He walked in like he'd built the place. Because, in a way, he had. He was early. The meeting hadn't officially started, because it hadn't been scheduled. Yet, every department head was already there. Compliance, legal, risk, HR, regional ops. A few executive assistants with shaky laptops. They stood when he entered. Some out of respect. Some out of confusion. Most out of fear. No one greeted him. He didn't greet them either. He took the center seat, not the guest chair, not the one offered, and set a slim folder on the table. Inside, data, timestamps, email headers, and one line of typed text. Review initiated by controlling partner. The regional director, a woman named Patrice Langley, was the first to speak. Mr. Ward, she started, tight-lipped, you didn't expect me to show up, Elijah said, voice calm, not sharp. I know. A beat. Then, you expected this to stay abstract. The kind of mistake you can write off in a memo. No one moved. He let the silence stretch. Let them feel it. Then he continued. But when you let disrespect become policy, eventually policy becomes personal. He opened the folder, pulled out a single printout, a transaction log. He slid it forward, face up to legal. 42. Withdrawals flagged manually, he said. 89% connected to non-white clients. 0 disciplinary notes. 3 escalations, all buried. Patrice tried to shift the conversation. We understand there's been concern raised by your recent visit. Concern. Elijah repeated, voice still low. You think this is about concern? He turned to HR. How many complaints need to name the same teller before she's reviewed? The HR lead hesitated. Well, it's not always that simple. It is, Elijah cut in. Then he leaned forward, flat palms on the table. She made it personal. You all made it policy, so now I'm making it permanent. He pulled out a second document, a signed directive, effective immediately, restructuring of Midtown Federal Holdings. Terminations pending. Compliance sweep scheduled. Full staff transparency mandated. No committee. No discussion. He had the votes. He always did. Then he turned to the youngest person in the room, a black assistant seated 2 chairs down. She looked like she wanted to disappear. What's your name? Elijah asked. She startled. Yvonne, sir. How long have you worked here? 8 months. You ever get treated like I did? She hesitated, then nodded. Once. He nodded back, then turned to Patrice. She stays. No one objected. By the time the meeting ended, 5 people had been quietly asked to leave the building. 3 had resigned by 4 p.m. 2 more were told not to return the next day. No shouting, no firings in front of the floor. Just quiet reversals. And in every office that had once ignored the patterns, files were now being reopened. Because Elijah didn't just walk through the door. He reset the locks behind him. Later that day, he returned to the branch. Not to the counter, to the break room. The staff froze when he entered. Marissa wasn't there, but her name was on everyone's lips without being spoken. Elijah looked to the room, then spoke once. This isn't about her. This is about what you all saw and said nothing about. He paused. You don't have to fight for me, but you do have to stop hiding from each other. Then he left, and the silence he left behind, it stayed long after he walked out. Because the most dangerous man in the room isn't the one who yells. It's the one who shows up quietly and never leaves the same way he came in. They told her it was just a standard debrief. Nothing formal. No write-up. Just a quick review of recent transactions. A routine protocol to make sure everyone's aligned with expectations. Marissa believed them. She walked into the conference room in a gray blazer and heels too high for someone whose confidence was starting to crack. Her badge still clipped on. Her posture still practiced, but her breath? Uneven. She wasn't stupid. She knew things had shifted. Clients had stopped smiling at her. Her manager had stopped backing her. And the last withdrawal she flagged, a teenager trying to deposit birthday cash, had been reversed by compliance in under an hour. Still, she believed she'd be fine. She always was. Until the door opened, and Elijah Ward walked in. Not flanked by lawyers. Not armed with files. Just him. And that's what made it worse. He didn't sit across from her. He sat beside her. Not as an opponent. As someone who already knew the ending. He set a folder down between them. Didn't open it. Just rested his hand on top. Then he said, "Do you know why we're here, Marissa?" She blinked. I was told this is about client experience. No, Elijah said, calm, quiet, icy. This is about patterns. She swallowed, still trying to smile, still trying to steer. I understand there's been some confusion recently, but I've always followed protocol. Sometimes customers can be aggressive, and Do you know how many accounts you manually flagged this year? He asked. Her mouth opened, closed. I'm not sure. That's tracked centrally. 42, he said, then tapped the folder once. Not loud, not sharp, just final. 37 of them were flagged without a second identifier. That's against policy. You bypass the system. She shifted in her chair. There must be context. There is, Elijah replied. That's the problem. He opened the folder, pulled out a page, laid it flat in front of her. A timestamp, a transaction, her name in the log. August 3rd, he said. You flagged a man named Marcus Bell for suspicious withdrawal. He was depositing a check from his mother's estate. She stayed silent. Another page. June 14th. A woman named Tanya Cooper. You asked for 3 forms of ID. None were required by policy. Another. May 9th. You delayed a withdrawal of $300 because the client, a black teenager, looked nervous. That's what you wrote in the notes. I was following instinct, she muttered. We're trained to look for unusual behavior. No, Elijah said, you're trained to look for risk, and you treat black as risk. She shifted again. This time, the silence pressed on her harder. He wasn't raising his voice, but somehow it got louder in the room. Elijah leaned back. I didn't come here to ruin your job, Marissa. She looked up hopeful. But I came to end the comfort you've had in hiding behind policy. Her shoulders dropped just slightly. He continued, you were never the only problem, but you were a symptom that refused to check itself. He turned toward the glass wall. Outside, a few employees had gathered, pretending to organize files, but clearly watching. Marissa noticed them, too. For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar. Seen, but not in control. Elijah stood, gathered the pages, left one on the table. Not the worst one, not the most recent, just one that showed who she had been when she didn't think anyone was watching. Then he said, there's nothing I need from you, Marissa, but there's a lot this place no longer owes you. And he walked out. She didn't get fired that day. There were protocols, HR reviews, legal protections, but something had already ended, because after that moment, no one deferred to her. No one defended her, and every hallway she walked through felt like it had finally stopped echoing her name. Elijah never mentioned her again, not in reports, not in interviews, because she wasn't the story. She was just the face the system wore until it got caught in a mirror. And Elijah? He wasn't satisfied. He was just done giving warnings. It started with a post, not a press release, not a headline, just a quiet note uploaded by a junior analyst on a private workplace forum. Have you ever flagged a transaction because of a gut feeling and then wondered months later what that gut was really trained to fear? No tags, no names, but within 2 hours, it had over 30 replies. By the end of the day, someone reposted it anonymously to the company-wide Slack channel. By morning, the conversation was on fire. Not loud, not angry, but present. For the first time. Compliance read it first, then legal, then HR, and then it began, not an outcry, but a release. Emails started circulating. Screenshots of chat logs, internal memos, risk profiles color-coded by race without ever saying the word. An intern shared a story about how she was told to keep an eye on cash-heavy customers, especially if they don't speak perfect English. A former branch manager anonymously admitted that he had a quota for escalated interactions, and non-white clients made it easier to hit that number. No names, but patterns. And the patterns spoke louder than any person ever had. Within 72 hours, a former teller from another city posted a now viral Medium essay titled, "The training told us to smile. The culture told us who to smile at." The piece was short, brutally calm. She wrote about a time she denied a check to a black father because it looked altered despite it clearing instantly once the supervisor approved it. She never apologized in the essay, but she never had to. The confession was too real to ignore. A ripple turned into a wave. Midtown Federal's board called an emergency closed-door session. External auditors were contacted. Whistleblower lines reopened. But it was too late to control the narrative. Because the story wasn't Elijah anymore. It was all the people who'd stayed silent, now speaking because he had shown that silence didn't have to last forever. Yvonne, the young black assistant Elijah had spoken to, started collecting anonymous testimonies. She didn't organize a protest, didn't call for firings. She just created a Google form titled, "What You Saw But Were Told to Forget." Submissions poured in. One line stood out. "I watched a man get flagged, humiliated, and delayed. I did nothing. Now I can't stop seeing his face." Meanwhile, Elijah said nothing. He didn't issue statements, didn't tweet, didn't leak. He let the silence do its work, because the moment was no longer his. It belonged to the system and what it did with its reflection. Then something happened no one expected. A compliance officer named Drew Keller went public, not in anger, but with documentation. He revealed a backlog of ignored red flags going back 3 years. Over 60 reports, most marked no action required. He didn't name names, but he named processes. He said, "We weren't just bad at identifying bias, we were good at normalizing it." That quote hit newsrooms before the board could stop it. Midtown's stock dropped 9%. Customers closed over 18,000 accounts in 4 days. A banking podcast featured the story with the title, "The Quiet Man Who Broke the Loud Machine." They meant Elijah, but Elijah was at home, reading, cooking, writing. When asked for comment, his office replied, "Mr. Ward is not available for commentary. This isn't about him." And that's when people realized that was the point. Inside the bank, faces started changing. Some quietly resigned. Some just stopped showing up. But others stayed. People like Yvonne, people who'd seen the machine from the inside, but now wanted to build something else. They weren't loud. They were present. They started holding small meetings, reading reports out loud, challenging language like high risk and non-standard profile. They printed out one quote and taped it near every printer. "You are not responsible for what came before you, but you are responsible for what you let continue." No one tore it down. Not this time. One Friday, a package arrived at Elijah's office. No name on the label. Inside, a stack of handwritten letters. Dozens. From tellers, analysts, guards, former clients. One even from a regional executive who'd stepped down. Each one short. Some were just a sentence. "I saw it and did nothing. I won't do that again. You made space. I'll keep it open. We were never trained to listen, but I'm learning." Elijah read every single one, then placed them in a wooden box his grandfather had carved when Elijah was 12. And he locked it, not to hide them, to keep them safe, because the silence had been broken. And now, it could never be rebuilt the same way again. The cameras were ready, not Elijah's, theirs. Midtown Federal's corporate team had decided, after much internal debate and legal choreography, to host a public statement. A gesture. A performance dressed up as accountability. They invited press, crafted talking points, hired a crisis communications consultant to write the speech. And then they made one final decision: invite Elijah Ward to stand beside them. The optics would be perfect, a black billionaire investor. A public show of humility. They even prepared a script, printed in glossy folders, with his name at the top. He didn't show up, but he sent something instead. A single-page memo. No letterhead, no signature, just one sentence. "If the truth needs a stage, you're not ready to tell it." The press conference went on without him. Stiff apologies, references to recent concerns. Words like listening and committed and moving forward. No names, no direct accountability, no mention of Marissa, or the 42 manual flags, or the man whose account they tried to bury under protocol. When they opened for questions, a reporter from the Ledger raised her hand. "Has Elijah Ward responded to your internal reforms?" The CEO smiled, a little too tightly. "We've been in communication," he said. No one believed him. Meanwhile, Elijah was 300 miles away, in a courthouse. Not for a lawsuit, for a filing. He stood in front of a judge with a quiet voice and a paper in his hand. Eastbridge Capital will divest all holdings from Midtown Federal and its affiliates, effective immediately. No press, no cameras, no handshake deal, just a legal motion and a calm exit. Back in Midtown HQ, the message hit like a second explosion. They had expected negotiation. Instead, they got a severance, and not the kind written in a contract. The board scrambled. Some members pleaded to open a private conversation. Others tried to save face. But the headlines had already shifted. Ward walks away. $280 million exit signals deeper crisis. Justice doesn't need applause. Investor pullout sparks culture audit. And the line that stuck. He didn't ask for reform. He executed it. Elijah didn't speak publicly, but his actions made the point. Behind the scenes, he signed papers, approved small business grants for formerly denied clients, reached out to 2 regional branches that had kept their hands clean, and offered them something Midtown never did. Trust. He started funding community banks, quiet ones, built by people who didn't need DI workshops to recognize dignity. And he wrote checks, not for show, to the intern who blew the whistle, to the assistant who stayed behind, to the retired branch manager who had written him a letter starting with, "I saw it, sir. I stayed quiet. Not anymore." He didn't host a gala. He didn't buy a new tower. He went to the same cafe every Tuesday, read the paper, ordered the same coffee, and when someone new sat beside him, someone confused about where to start, he just slid a notepad across the table. Written at the top, start with who was missing from the table. The press kept circling. TV crews, opinion columns, think pieces. But Elijah never responded, because justice for him was never about the headline. It was about the policy that stayed changed after the camera shut off. One day, Yvonne called him. Nervous. They asked me to speak on a panel for the company. He waited. I don't want to perform. I want to rebuild. He smiled. Then don't wear their name on your chest, he said. Wear your own. She paused, then said, thank you. He replied, you don't owe me anything, but you owe yourself the room they tried to keep you out of. That week, Midtown sent out a newsletter, internal only. It said, we're proud of the dialogue that's begun. Elijah read it, closed the tab, and kept walking. Because dialogue doesn't matter if the system still waits for the performance to end before it listens. The next document he signed wasn't about Midtown. It was about ownership. He moved funds into black-led lending institutions. He partnered with immigrant-founded credit unions. He didn't post it, but people noticed. One line in a local paper said it best. He's not investing in money. He's investing in memory. Justice, Elijah believed, doesn't need applause. It needs follow-through. It doesn't need a headline. It needs a hand raised in the back of the room that doesn't drop after the speech is done. And most of all, it doesn't come when you're ready to be seen. It comes when you're ready to stop hiding who you've let disappear. The fallout wasn't a wave. It was an echo. Not loud, not sudden, but constant, like a low hum that wouldn't go away. It started small. A local podcast did a segment on banking while black. They didn't mention names. Didn't have to. The story had legs, and those legs were already walking into rooms the bank couldn't control. Then came the walkouts. At first, 1 or 2 employees from different branches quietly resigned. Then 5, then 12. Some sent messages before leaving. Some didn't, but their silence wasn't passive. It was deliberate. They left notes taped to screens, locked drawers, handwritten on resignation forms. We were taught to make people invisible. I'm done pretending I don't see them. Customers followed. One by one, people closed their accounts. Some walked in quietly. Others made appointments just to explain why. A woman in Houston sat down across from a branch manager and said, I watched what you did to that man on the news. I may not have billions, but I know where my dignity banks. A week later, she was gone, and so was her business's payroll account. Smaller banks saw spikes in new applications, especially black-owned ones, community lenders, immigrant-run credit unions, places that hadn't changed their branding overnight because they never needed to pretend. They had always seen who walked through the door. A fintech startup in Atlanta added a new filter to their algorithm, flagging for discriminatory behavior in client interactions. They didn't announce it, but Elijah got a call from their founder Anyway, your silence shook more than their press statement ever could. He didn't respond with congratulations. He just said, keep building, but don't build it like them. Meanwhile, Midtown's branches started to look emptier. Not just in customers, in spirit. The ones who stayed behind felt the shift. The music in the lobby got softer. The fake smiles faded. The "We're a family" posters were quietly taken down, and in their place, a small memo, unofficial, printed and taped beside the teller booths. Check the name, check the face, but don't check your humanity at the counter. Yvonne kept working, but she wasn't in the same role. She asked to be reassigned, not promoted, just repositioned. Somewhere I can build something, she told HR. They placed her in the training department. 3 weeks later, she rewrote the onboarding manual. The first sentence now read, "This job is about trust, and trust isn't given by policy, it's earned by presence." One afternoon, she walked into the break room and found a group of new hires reading something off a whiteboard. It was a quote from Elijah's court filing. "Silence isn't neutrality. It's agreement dressed up to feel safe." They'd written it down themselves. No one told them to. In cities far from Midtown's reach, high school econ teachers were assigning the case study. Law schools debated the audit documents as examples of passive, systemic reinforcement. An artist in Detroit painted a mural of Elijah, not his face, just his silhouette, sitting on a bench reading a newspaper. Above it, "You don't have to shout to shake the room." But Elijah didn't show up. Not to the gallery. Not to the panels. Not to the panels held in his name. He stayed where he always had, behind the scenes, between the lines, letting the story live without him. Because he'd never needed the light. Only the leverage. And leverage he still had. Quiet calls from regional managers. Private lunches with credit union directors. Emails signed. A friend of the shift. He didn't dictate. He recommended. He sent PDFs, case templates, training examples. No watermark. No copyright. Just one line on the last page. Use it better than they did. One night in a library in Oakland, a young woman opened a folder marked Ward. It had no bio, no timeline, just documents, letters, notes, quotes, clippings. She asked the librarian who had submitted it. He smiled, no one sure. But it showed up after someone closed 3 accounts and said, "I'm banking where silence isn't the policy anymore." Midtown never fully recovered. They rebranded, hired new people, donated to a few causes, but people remembered, and memory has no PR team. You can't spin what people felt in their gut. And across the street, the marble bench still stood, empty most days. But some mornings someone sat there, reading, watching, and if you looked closely, sometimes you'd see a newspaper folded neatly down the middle, white sneakers, calm posture, no rush, and you'd know, the echo didn't fade. It just learned how to listen. It didn't happen on a stage. There were no cameras, no statements, no audience waiting for applause. But one by one, the quiet reckonings began. Some came with tears, others came with silence. But they all came from the people who had been there the whole time, watching, nodding, letting it happen. The janitor who used to mop near the teller window, the one who saw Marissa turn her smirk into a system, left a note taped to the break room fridge. You weren't the only one she humiliated. But you were the first to make her stop. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. One afternoon, Yvonne got an unexpected visitor in the training room. It was Alex, the assistant manager, who used to deflect every complaint with a joke or a shrug. He didn't say much, just stood in the doorway, eyes a little lower than usual, and said, "I told myself I wasn't the problem, but I also never said a word, and now I don't like the sound of my silence." He didn't ask for forgiveness. Yvonne didn't offer it, but she did hold the door open wider when he walked out. Then came the email, from someone anonymous. It was short. "I was the one who filed the first false flag on your account. It was protocol, but that's no excuse. I knew what I was doing. I just didn't know who I was doing it to. I don't want a response. I just want to say, I finally see it." Elijah read it, then archived it, because closure didn't need replies, Only recognition. Weeks later, in a different city at a different branch, a black teller was onboarding a new hire. She pointed to a sticky note taped beside her screen. "You see that quote?" she asked. "That came from a man they tried to erase. Didn't work." The new hire nodded, unsure. But she'd remember it later. The quote read, "Policy without presence becomes permission." One rainy afternoon, as Elijah was leaving the building, he saw someone waiting near the bench outside. Not sitting, standing, hands in pockets. It was Marissa. Not dressed in heels. Not styled. Just plain real. Their eyes met. She didn't speak. He didn't stop. But he nodded. And she nodded back. No words. No plea. Just the first moment she hadn't looked away. That night, Elijah wrote something in his notebook. Reckoning isn't punishment. It's the moment someone hears their own silence and finally decides it's too loud. He didn't publish it. He just wrote it, then turned the page. At a small community event, someone introduced Elijah to a 19-year-old student who had been denied a loan at Midtown the year before. She smiled wide and said, "They said I didn't have enough credit history." He smiled back. "What did you do?" She lifted her head. "I built my own record." Then handed him a card. Founder, Director, Microcapital Access Network. He laughed softly. "They'll regret underestimating you." She answered, "They already do. But I don't need that. I just need to make sure I don't become them." In Chicago, an ex-employee started a blog. Its tagline, "Confessions from a former teller who learned too late what she was complicit in." Her second post read, "Elijah never shouted, but he made a lot of people hear themselves for the first time. Some reckonings were quiet. One former district manager, now retired, sent a donation to a nonprofit Elijah had supported. He didn't include name, just a sticky note inside the envelope. For the ones we overlooked, starting with myself, a teenage boy, the same one whose withdrawal was delayed for looking nervous, was featured on a youth financial literacy podcast. When they asked who inspired him, he said, "I don't know his full story," but he didn't raise his voice, and he still shook the whole room. Meanwhile, Elijah walked the same route, same cafe, same folded newspaper. He was approached less often now, not out of fear, out of respect. People understood this wasn't a performance. This was a presence. And presence doesn't require noise. It only requires that you don't disappear, even when everyone else expects you to. Because the real reckoning, it doesn't happen in headlines. It happens when a person who stood by finally decides to stand for. The bank had changed its colors. New logo, new slogan, new training videos. But Elijah still walked past it the same way every Tuesday. Same bench, same folded paper, same pause at the corner before the crosswalk. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about presence, because memory doesn't live in headlines. It lives in habits, in the quiet repetition of someone who refused to vanish, even when the world pretended not to see him. Inside the branch, most of the faces had changed. The old guard was gone, some by resignation, others by quiet reallocation. The air felt different, not warmer, not colder, just the wear. No one rushed to greet him when he walked by, but no one ignored him either. There was no performance left to give. Yvonne was there, training a new hire. She caught Elijah's eye through the glass. He nodded. She nodded back. That was enough. They didn't need to speak anymore. Their language had been carved in silence. In the far corner, a young boy, maybe 10, stood on tiptoe at the counter, his mother beside him, beaming. A teller handed him his first debit card. Elijah paused, watched. The moment was small, but it was everything. Because this time, no one questioned the name on the card. Outside, the bench had a small plaque now. No name, just a quote. They tried to erase the presence. Instead, it became the proof that won't go away. Elijah hadn't written it. No one ever admitted who did. But it was real, bolted to the stone. One day, a young man sat beside him, wiry, restless, nervous energy in the foot tapping the sidewalk. He glanced over. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Elijah didn't look up from his paper. "You just did?" The boy smiled nervously. "I mean, how did you do it?" Do what? Change everything, without yelling, without burning it down. Elijah folded the paper, set it on his lap, then said, because if you want the foundation to shake, you don't need fire. You need to know exactly where to knock. The boy nodded slowly, then sat back, and said nothing else. That night, Elijah opened the same leather-bound notebook he'd carried for years, wrote a single line, "I never wanted to be remembered. I just didn't want to be ignored." Then closed the book. Not forever, just until the next person asked the same question. In the weeks that followed, stories kept surfacing. A clerk in another city stopped a flag before it hit the system. A branch manager in Ohio implemented anonymous feedback on teller behavior. A young teller refused a gut-feeling escalation and got promoted for her judgment, not her fear. Small things, quiet things, but enough to make ripples that wouldn't die. One afternoon, Elijah stopped by the bench and found a folded envelope tucked into the corner. Inside, a short letter. Because of what happened, I didn't just learn how to bank. I learned how not to disappear. No name, no contact, just wait. Elijah didn't need a legacy. He just needed to know someone else had stopped waiting for permission to matter, and now they had. He stood, folded the letter, placed it inside his notebook, then walked. No camera followed him. No article recorded his steps. But the street remembered. The teller window remembered. The folder in the system, flagged and reversed, remembered. And the presence? Still there. No louder, but impossible to ignore. Because in the end, there is no final chapter. Only a choice. To be present. To remain standing. To fold your paper neatly. And to never again let them act like you weren't there.